Hello and welcome back to Startups, People and Equity. This is a space where we discuss topics, related to startups, people and equity. We hope that you will enjoy listening to today's episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. Let's dive straight in.
Eva is currently head of people at Passion.io, an online learning platform. She has a very sturdy educational background for the role she's in. She completed a bachelor and a master's degree in psychology and topped it off with a law degree from the University of Munster. She started her career in talent acquisition and quickly added the general people agenda to her responsibilities. She's very well versed in all the good stuff that is on the plate of a people professional. And today we will focus on her experience building Passion's employee equity scheme and her view on the return to the office wave that we've witnessed in the past couple of months. So again, thank you for giving us a bit of your time. Would you add anything on that, like slightly dry and superficial introduction?
No, I think it gives a pretty good overview. Well done. Good job. And thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. What do you do outside of work? I usually like to ask guests because it also paints the picture that is currently a bit black and white.
Yeah, true. So I love to travel. I travel a lot and try to do at least 2-3 trips per year. Sometimes one of them is a workation, as everyone likes to say nowadays. And I really enjoy meeting new people and just putting myself into different environments. And then outside of traveling, I love running. So I'm usually running probably every day. I know I shouldn't. Rest days are important, but it really helps me to free my mind. And I'm a morning runner. So I get up early and I run just for myself, just for fun. And really enjoy that a lot. And the rest of the time, I guess I'm spending with my dog and my husband.
Amazing. Yeah, perfect. A lot of colors added. Thank you. Did you study law, by the way, with the intention of becoming a better people officer?
Absolutely.
Or was that okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. That's why I already chose the topic of labor law. It was really important for me. So I'm very passionate about my career. And I think everyone should be, right? So I wanted to build my career in a way that enables me to add value to organizations that I wanted to work with. And I knew that I had the background in psychology and I always enjoyed everything people. But I've also identified that especially the labor law related questions are very expensive. So when you want to add value to an organization, you can do that in different ways, right? But one of them is to save them money in very different ways. And so I thought with that labor law degree, with my Master of Laws in labor law, I'm going to be able to cover a lot of ground that we won't need an external advisor for in the company that I work at. And that was the background.
A career architect. Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's especially fantastic when it comes to the head of people that does take care of other people's careers and you just lead by example. Perfect. Yeah. What drew you to the people space in the first place?
Yeah, so I've been asked that question a couple of times, and I think what really, and whenever you get asked a certain question, I think you answer a little bit differently each and every time and learn something about yourself, right? So for questions that you get asked a lot, at some point you realize, that's the real reason. So I think the answer was very different 5 years ago. But now it really is that I think I was meant to be a people person in the tech space because my mom is an HR manager and I started working with her. Well, she's going to say for her very early at a young age, just kind of earning a little bit of money besides school. And my dad is a software engineer and I'm an only child. So my dad always taught me everything because he's very, very passionate about his job. So I think I was meant to be a people person in the tech space or a software engineer in a HR company, maybe, but it turned out that way.
And what would have been your answer 5 years ago?
The answer 5 years ago was that I really enjoy recruiting. And that made me realize that I'm really passionate about finding the right person for a certain role and finding a company that someone wants to work for. And that was what I did back then, right? So I really enjoyed that. But I, at some point, realized that this is not everything. There's so much more in the people space that I can own and that I can learn and embrace. So, but that's what got me into it. And I still very much like the idea of a really good recruiting process. I think it's one of the most important things you can do in a company, to design a process that is enjoyable for the candidates and has a great impact on the business. Because at the end of the day, everything we do, it comes down to the people, right? Of course.
No stress. Do you have to get that? Or?
No, I don't. It's
okay.
Gonna be fine.
Your dog can by now open the door.
Yeah, exactly. People run
fantastic.
as soon as they hear her.
Nice. And I wanted to ask this to people officer for a long time. How much parallel or overlap do you see between sales and talent acquisition?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So the way I see it, I'm gonna start again in 5 seconds. You can cut that out, right? Perfect.
We can put it in bloopers at the end or something.
Perfect, yeah. Okay. That's an interesting question. The way I see it, the people... Genie, haben wir es jetzt? Hör auf.
It's a bigger doggy, like it has some depth to the voice.
You see her?
It's
right there.
She's chilling.
It's a Hungarian hunting dog. She only hunts treats, though, to be fair.
My sister has a Vizsla as well.
Oh my gosh, Vizslas are the best, right? They're the best.
I think my family had them for generations. Yeah. So stereotypical.
Yeah, I'm never going to have a different breed ever in my life. She's
really? Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
Okay, do you want to ask your question again? And then I promise she's going to stop.
Yeah, I can also try to convince her in Hungarian, see if the genes kick in. Yeah, I always wanted to ask this from a people officer, but how much overlap or commonalities do you see between sales and talent acquisition?
That's an interesting question, because I think there's actually a lot of similarity. And when you look at the people department, the people function, and that's really interesting, it's actually one of the most complex functions in an organization, if you ask me. Because what we do is everything the other functions do. We do sales in talent acquisition. We do CS for employees. It's a product, so we kind of have to design our product, our features, and ensure that our employee experience is great. So I think there is so much of sales in talent acquisition and so much of all the other departments in what we do in a people function, which makes it so exciting for me to be part of this department specifically.
How did you make the transition from just recruiting to then being a full people officer?
It was I had a step in between where I went from talent acquisition or recruiting to consulting. And that was where I really got so interested in different organizations, how they shape their organizational structure, how they treat their people, how they design their employee experience. And at first I was consulting in talent acquisition projects because that was what I learned and what I was good at. But pretty fast, because of my background in psychology, I saw so many other things in the companies that I was consulting for. And I'm not the kind of person that just focuses on what they're asked to do, right? When I see things left and right, I will mention them. And that's what happened. And then I moved more and more into like the entire people function in a consulting role. And after that, I realized it's great, but I want to do it for one company. I want to feel part of the team. I want to be the person that interacts with the employees on a day-to-day basis. And that's how I went from talent acquisition through consulting to my first tech startup.
You said all the buzzwords with the belonging and everything like that. I think you kind of built the bridge very nicely over to equity. So do you want to walk us through like where you started, what you had in place when you started taking, when you took this project on, and how was that experience for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we had when we started, we had a couple of people that had virtual shares in the organization. I think that's, from what I've heard, at least from a couple of peers, that's often where it starts. You have some very senior people or some very key people that have their own, little equity agreement where there is no specific rules, no policy, no process involved. It's basically just, we hired a VP something, they asked for equity, and we're going to give it to them as part of their package. So that's where we were. And then we had a project for our eNPS score, actually. That was where it got started. So we looked into engagement metrics, and I know eNPS, it's not the only one. We look into other factors as well, including something I love a lot, which is interviewing your employees. So that's a really good way to understand what they are looking for and what's important to them. And what we found in the course of that project was that the majority of people felt very connected to the company, which is exactly what you want to achieve, right? But they also didn't feel like they are entirely able to participate in the success of the company that they contribute to. So compensation wasn't the only factor they were interested in, because you keep talking in a startup, you keep talking about how this is going to take off, how this is going to be successful, and you think it's going to make people want to join you, and you think people are going to stay for it. But why would they stay if they're not able to participate in this big success, right? They're not going to stay for a 5% pay rise. It's more than that. So if you have this story, and we certainly do, you also have to go the second step and make people participate in that success and show them that you value their contribution long term. Because otherwise, and that's what a lot of companies see and what I've seen as well in the past, people are going to stay the 1-2 years and then move to the next opportunity. And that's exactly what you want to avoid, especially with a small team, because these people have these great insights and learnings. It's very important skills that you're losing. And that's when the idea came up to roll out an equity plan across the board for every single employee. That was important for us from the start. I know there are different approaches and we discussed them, but for us it was important from CEO up until whatever, CS assistant, intern, something like that. Everyone should have their piece of the cake. And that's the idea we went for, and that's how we started.
What was the first thing you did after you aligned on this philosophy? How did you get started on then actually knowing what, when, how much?
Yeah, I got started with Google. I think that's what a lot of people do when they want to look into a new topic. And so we had, in my previous company, we did have an equity plan as well. It was only for a certain group of employees, though, a smaller group of employees. And it was very specific. I wasn't involved in creating it. I was only involved in taking care of it and rolling it out to the employees that joined, that fell into this category, basically. And for passion, I started to create a knowledge database, basically. So I opened a Google Doc, I went to Google, and I started finding resources, seeing how other people do it. I looked for use cases. I ended up, like probably everyone that starts searching, with the index venture overview that you come across, and I started digging deeper into the topic. So yeah, that's how I got started, just getting a little more information on how do you approach that.
How did you separate the numbers from everything else around an equity plan? So you first mentioned you needed to align on essentially the philosophy. Why are we doing this? How did you translate that into the numbers and then rolling it out and communicating around it?
So that was the hardest part, I think. So first of all, this whole research phase took a lot of time because it was sometimes difficult to understand. Like if that's not your bread and butter, it just gets so big. It's such a big topic. And I reached out to a couple of peers asking them to send me their equity program just to look at it and see how other companies did it. That was really helpful, actually, to get like an example for how you can do it. And then I started collecting the things that were aligned with our philosophy. And I think it was actually, we were pretty lucky to start with the philosophy behind it, because that made it much easier for me to select the things that work for us and also find the things that won't work for us. So I came across a couple of different approaches, and there's always some limitation to how you design something like that, right? So with everyone being involved in this plan, we had to find a way to still not give all the shares that we have out, because we're still hiring and we want to add more people to our organization. So we had to kind of find a number of shares that we think we should allocate to the current team, also to put them into a slightly more favorable position than all the new hires, because we thought it's important that the earlier employees benefit more than the hires that come later, right? So those were the two things that I thought about. And then we came up with this concept of different percentages depending on your level of seniority and your department, because that's something I came across quite a lot, because we have people that are much closer to the product than others, like the tech and product team, for example. They have a very immediate impact on how the product is going to evolve. And it looked to me like in a lot of companies, it's best practice and also required to be on market level for offers, that these people have a slightly higher percentage in terms of equity than, for example, the CS team, which is also much bigger. So that's how we created this little grid, basically, and applied it to our team to find out what would be the value of the equity that they would be eligible to. And there was a lot of back and forth. It wasn't like doing it once and saying, there we go, wonderful, done. But a lot of back and forth to find out what's the right approach. And then also what's the next steps for new hires. And yeah, I think that's how we ended up translating it into numbers.
I love listening to this, because it's the first time that we record an episode, or even that we like in depth ask someone about their experience. At least on my side, I know, Spiller, you've done this quite a lot of times, but hearing this is really fascinating. There are a lot of snippets which kind of completely match our strategy on how we help clients, and there are parts that are a little bit alien to that. But coming back to something you said, you were saying that there is a percentage you apply based on a level, right? So you had to do a leveling. Was that already in place when you started the equity project, or did you have to do that as well? Okay.
Fortunately, it was already in place. So that's a project that I did before that. So we created our career framework and did some leveling work. And I was so glad that we did, because that made it so much easier. We had everyone on a certain level already, and it was quite aligned. So we use option impact data for market data in salary questions. And we used a similar, like slightly simplified version, because we're still a very small company, right? Slightly simplified version of that for our leveling system. And that made it much easier to classify the different groups of employees. So we had the departments and we had the seniority levels. So that made it much easier.
Okay, great. So you actually answered what was going to be my next question, because I was also going to ask, like, did you benchmark salary before? But then you did. And then you came on to equity, which is great, which is kind of the process that we recommend. And the percentage you mentioned, do you apply it on everyone's salary? Or is it like a fixed percentage, maybe to the midpoint of the bracket for that particular job family and level? We're getting a bit technical, but I think you're shaking, so I think we can go here.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I looked into different options for that, as you can imagine, and we ended up with applying it to the salary. So it's applied to the base salary right now. It's not related to the midpoint, and it's not related to the overall pool, like a percentage of the company ownership. I would have preferred percentage of the company ownership, but it turned out to be quite complex. And we thought a good first step, because we already level salary, right? So we imagine it's at market level. And then if we have a market level percentage for equity, we would hope that this lines up in a way that makes it a fair compensation in the end, or a fair package. So we went for the percentage of the salary as a first step. I'm not saying that we might not improve that going forward, maybe.
That makes complete sense. I mean, on top of what you just said, you have market salary as a base, applying 30% to a product person versus 30% to an administrator person. That already then reflects the market in the offer.
Exactly.
So it helps you a little bit. And the reason why also our clients, we suggest them do that, is because equity benchmarks do not have that privilege of actually having been market benchmarked. No one has put out equity benchmarks that actually work as a self-standing product. And there's a good reason for that, but it means that it's always better to benchmark it off of salary, also for fairness and so on. But it's a good, sustainable choice.
Interesting. I didn't know. That's really interesting. That's why I wasn't able to find basically any reliable data on. It's not like market salary. It's really fairly easy to find like average salaries for a certain position in a certain location. But for equity, I just didn't find anything very valuable.
Yeah, we've had to actually develop our own benchmarking system so that we can help our clients. And it's always a triangulation task. So you do have some benchmarks. We've worked with some clients. We see what happens in some industries. But then you do have two guardrails that you have to pay attention to. One of them is the budget of the pool, and the other one is the timeline until next time you can increase the budget. And so that timeline means what you said first. You're going to have to hire some people. You're going to have to promote some people. You're going to have to give some performance or tenure grants to some people. So these are all things that get added as a line item to the budget. And now you have what you need for the budget. You have the budget total because you know how big the pool is. You have the time until you can increase it next. And then you just put in the benchmarks until you get to a number that doesn't oversubscribe your pool.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's the only way currently to work with equity.
And then we haven't mentioned the terms, which is also another interesting piece to benchmark. Like, what do you do? 4-year vesting, 1-year cliff, or is your business model more suited to something else? And at this point, I think it's interesting to talk about virtual shares as a phenomenon in Germany. Like, did you look into why that is, and did you try to stretch the boundaries of that, or were you just happy to go ahead with the virtual shares?
Yeah, we did look into it. Germany is, as always, tending to do things more complicated than other countries. It's just a matter of fact that there wasn't just one moment when I thought, why can't I be in the US right now? That would make my life so much easier. But we decided to just go for it. We just went for it as it is, and honestly, I'm hoping that maybe the regulations might change in the future as also Germany understands that this is the new reality of how companies are going to operate. I mean, we're seeing a huge increase in small and medium businesses across the country, not only in Germany, in the whole of Europe, basically. And I think it's going to be more and more, or become more and more important, to create a legal system around shares and equity that helps people to actually execute on the benefit of it, right? Because that's the point. You want to benefit from these shares that you have. And yeah, that's my hope, at least.
There was a movement actually supported by Index Ventures called Not Optional that was trying to appeal to the legal body, I think in the entire European continent, to make it easier, to make it more approachable, to make it easier to give, grant, exercise, benefit from equity. And I think they achieved one step, but I think we're still, like you said, quite far behind the US, even the UK. The UK is also great.
True.
So what did you do when it came to the terms? How was the process of creating the terms for the entire equity scheme?
So the good thing was that we had terms for this pre-rollout equity scheme that we had, right? So these were created for these one-off situations that we had. So what I did, I basically took that, because you don't have to do work that has been done before, right? And translated it into an actual program that is suitable for all the people that we work with. And then ran it by someone that knows much more about equity schemes than I do. I think that's an important step, because at some point you also have to realize what's the things you can do and what's the things you can't do, right? And despite being a labor lawyer, it doesn't make me an expert in the terms and conditions of equity programs. And fortunately, we already had a pretty good base in place, I would say. And with some of the changes that we've done, we implemented a share split as well to make it easier for people to understand or to feel like it's valuable. Because if you get 1.2, it just doesn't feel very valuable. So we went through the share split process and then the terms and conditions. And I think that was a fairly smooth process, because we already had something in place that we were able to use as a starting point.
How long would you take that it took from deciding to create an equity scheme until rollout?
It was pretty much almost an entire year. It took really long.
Which part took the longest?
The research / actual scheme decision part, that took the longest, because there were many rounds of discussing with the leadership team and the C-level, then also going to the board, of course, and where do the shares come from and how do we plan to proceed with it, so we make sure that there is no negative impact on the company, and convincing everyone, because I think including offering shares to literally everyone in the company wasn't a concept that everyone was convinced of at the beginning, understandably, because people want to see the potential positive impact that it can have. And I think that took the longest, definitely. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about did you go beyond the initial grant that an employee receives? Did you think about like promotion grants and stuff like that, or in this first iteration you just wanted to make it simple and just really nail down the strategy for the initial grant bit?
So we did focus on the initial grant, but we also looked into top-ups and performance-related top-ups, because I think it's important for people to understand that there is still growth potential, right? It's not you get that and then they forget about it. It's like a race. You get a race and after 2 months, it's just normal. It doesn't have any impact on you anymore. But with the scheme that we created, and that's, I think, one of the advantages, people understand that in the career framework and how it's related to the equity scheme that we've created, they can level up in the company. And that means that they will get more shares because then they are on a different seniority level. To make it easier for us, we don't do that with every single promotion at every point in time of the year because we just don't have the capacity to do that as a team. So we group it. We do it in July and January. So we collect all of the promotions, all of the increases, and then we top up the equity for people twice a year to make sure that it's aligned with their seniority level, their performance, and also their current salary.
Can you speak to this taking care of part a little more? So are you the owner of the equity plan? Are you the one that has the final approval of the number? And where do you put these numbers? How do you look up how much someone has?
Yeah, I'm owning the equity plan first and foremost. I fortunately have a wonderful small team in my people department that helps me, especially with administration, making sure that we see where does the equity stand, when does it start vesting, how much is vested already. And it's currently organized in a Google Sheet. I think it does work for a certain number of people. I would definitely not recommend for 1,000+ employees. That's definitely going to become a pain, but that's how we do it today. Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. You should always pick the one that is easiest. If that's Google Sheet, then that's it.
And did you rely on any help from the finance team? We kind of have a little hidden agenda here, Rich Billa, because we are very vocal about the fact that we would like more people teams on the topic of equity. We think it's a very transformational subject, and if it's owned by the finance team, and I do want to not overgeneralize here because there are a lot of finance teams that will pay attention to that aspect, but it has a larger chance of being reduced to a more transactional situation, more similar to base pay.
Yeah, that's true. So the ownership will, for us at least, how I see it, definitely stay with the people team, because I think it's one of the biggest benefits that we have. And I want to own that because at the end of the day, I own all the metrics that are, from my point of view, related to it, like employee engagement, employee satisfaction, retention, all of these things. I own these KPIs and I'm responsible for them. So I should own one of the biggest factors we have to influence that. We did get help from the finance team, though, of course, because they're much more proficient with Google Sheets and all the formulas that can make your life easier. So we went for a draft and we asked them, how can we tune it? How can we make it easier to follow up on the process and vesting and everything? But it's more support, and it's more us telling them when there's news, updating them on how we approach the whole program, and making sure that it's, from an administration side, it's all set in the finance department, but owned by the people department in our case.
Fantastic split. I think it just utilizes the best skills of each group. Fantastic. And I think this is my last question for equity. I think we have an interesting remote topic. How did you approach education?
That was a really important one for us.